Hey everybody, I'm Steve Albert, announced by the voice of God, Chief Revenue Officer at 1010 Data. I'm here to talk about alternative data. I've been in the alternative data space for 10 years. I've been creating new alternative data-based products for Wall Street firms, first at Equifax, then continuing at MasterCard, and then again at 1010 Data. And 1010 Data has been providing solutions to help clients on Wall Street make sense and utilize and get the most out of their data since its founding in 2000, when its first client was the New York Stock Exchange. And I thought that given the amount of interest in alternative data right now on Wall Street, that what we could share is a perspective, given all the clients that we work with, give a perspective on what the winners, what the people who we see getting the most value and who are most getting the most alpha out of the investments in alternative data, to try to shed some light on what they're doing differently and how we think this market will evolve, given our experience. So it's an exciting time in our market. There is a lot of hype about alternative data. I no longer have to explain to people what alternative data is. These are major articles and major periodicals talking about alternative data because they realize something significant is happening. So what are they talking about? What does alternative data on Wall Street mean today? It primarily means things like web scraping, purchase information, receipt information, satellite imagery, building permits, app downloads. And you can see most of this information that people are talking about are consumer-oriented information. And it helps our clients to get insight into B2C companies. The CEO of APT was up here earlier, and he introduced the hype cycle. So I'm glad you guys are all primed for that. I think if you kind of think about where we are in this market, the hype cycle is a very useful framework to think about it. You usually have a trigger event that enables new solutions to be created. You usually have a first solution provider that comes out and educates the market about it. More suppliers of the similar solutions come out. The press hears about it because they realize something significant is going on. Then things change. When the market starts to go from early adopters to the next set of adopters, the market realizes that this is not a silver bullet, and that usually these new solutions take changes to people, processes, and technologies in order to really make them work. So it takes some time, but eventually you get to a stable market where firms are using these new solutions and it's integrated into the fabric of the way they do work every day. So if you look at the alternative data market for all those data sets I just mentioned, the trigger is really consumer digitization. And M Science was up here earlier today, and they really started out as Majestic Research. They were really the first company that started using consumer-oriented alternative data and creating solutions out of it. And shortly thereafter, starting in 2013 for us at 1010 Data, and then shortly thereafter lots of other firms, now there's a lot of firms using a lot of different data sets to create new solutions for firms on Wall Street. And now we have the press educating the market that, hey, this is a real shift in how decisions are being made. So what's driving this? Well, first, sell-side research. It's a cost center for banks now. The sell-side research industry has changed substantially over the last 15 years. Second, performance reporting by companies just hasn't changed that much, and in some cases, it has diminished, right? The best simple example of that is retailers a lot of times are no longer reporting monthly comps. And on the bottom, there's a lot more investment management firms than there were before. There's a lot more ETFs. There's a lot of people who are talking about you should just invest in a benchmark index, and so the drive to get an edge is more than it ever was before. But from our perspective, for people who've been providing database solutions to Wall Street firms for a long time, we ask the question, is this really new? And to us, this consumer-oriented data is absolutely new, but alternative data has been used on Wall Street for a very long time. And we have a lot of experience serving clients in the mortgage-backed securities market within fixed income. And I think that given 1010 Data's and my experience doing that, though the markets are different, there are some parallels and there are some learnings that can be gleaned from how that market evolved, since it's more mature than the one with all these new consumer-oriented alternative data products. So first, I'm going to walk through that. Let me give you a quick tutorial on mortgage-backed securities. There's a lovely family. They get a mortgage when they buy a house. They start paying that mortgage. Lots of other families do the same thing. All that money is pooled together into a pool. The pool is issued by someone like a major bank, like JP Morgan Chase. They then securitize those loans and they pay bondholders. And there are rules around who gets paid first. Money comes in, simply put, hey, first the AAA guys get paid, and then we pay on down until there's no more money left. So what do you want to know if you're an investor in mortgage-backed securities? You want to know how likely people are to pay their loans every month. You want to know who's going to be late. You want to know if they're going to refinance, because if they refinance, you're no longer going to get that interest payment for the next 30 years. So when this market started, issuers of securities published financial information. This is the equivalent of a 10Q of a company reporting a quarterly report. They reported pool level data. So you have hundreds or thousands of loans in this pool, and they reported things like average FICO score for all the loans in the pool, average loan to value ratio for loans in the pool, and that's when the loan is originated. And then they added information updated every month about how many people are paying their loans on time, how many are paying late, how many are in default. And that was great. People started to use this information when they're trading the bonds. People started to build models on the data, but they wanted more. So the issuers put enhanced pool level data. You know, two pools of mortgage loans, each with 1,000 loans in it that have an average FICO score of 700, can be really different. One can have a normal distribution around 700. The other might have a bimodal distribution with half the people at 750 and half the people at 650. They perform really differently. So now, the issuers of securities publish more granular information, but still aggregated. And over time, the market demanded more granular data, and issues pushed out loan-level data, information on every individual loan, all anonymous, about each individual loan that was when it was originated and how they're each being paid over time. This is a tremendous amount of information. These are huge data sets. And the models and the decision-making got much, much better. But that wasn't enough. The issuers stopped providing more information, but investors found new ways to get better information. So this right here in the gray, this is all the information that the issuers are providing on that previous slide. But what else would you want? Well, you'd want to know interest rates. If your pool of loans has, and most people have 6% interest rates, and interest rates go down to 5%, a lot of people are going to refinance their loan. So I need to link that together and incorporate that into my analysis. Home prices. A year after these loans are originated and securitized, home prices change. If I don't have any equity in my home, I'm a lot less likely to keep paying that loan. So now I got to link in home price information. And if I'm really sophisticated, I'm going to license property record data and build my own home price index models. There's mortgage information for every pool, for every loan in every securitized pool. But not all loans are securitized. There's a lot of loans that sit on banks' balance sheets. I really would like to know what's happening in the entire market. If I have more data about how loans perform, I can build more accurate models to account for small subsegments of the market. And that FICO score from origination, that gets old. People's FICO scores change. People have more than one loan. They have credit cards, they have auto loans, they have student loans. What my team did at Equifax is we came up with a solution to provide anonymized borrower credit information for the borrowers that are paying those loans to Wall Street firms. And now you knew someone's FICO had gone down from 720 down to 620. And it was going to be much harder for them to refinance that loan and much more likely for them to default, even though they're paying the mortgage because they maxed out a credit card. Why is this? So how did this evolve over time? Well, we had subprime lending. We had more complex securitized products emerge that were really the trigger of the market. There's one company. It's a company called Loan Performance. It was bought by First American Real Estate Solutions. They took all that issuer-provided loan-level data, standardized it, made it clean, easy for people to use on Wall Street, a lot like some of the firms that were here earlier talking about. Then a whole ecosystem of other providers and competitors emerged around this, including my firm, Equifax, competitors to First American Real Estate Solutions, and 1010 Data with our old, very boring logo up there at the time. We were a technology that really enabled firms to bring all this data together really easily and use it. We didn't really have the traditional hype cycle because we had a bump in the road called the subprime crisis, and that really took everything on a detour. But the result is really the same. You now have a relatively mature market. Many of these solution providers still exist, although some didn't make it and some have been consolidated. But you have a very mature market of people using these solutions every day in very sophisticated ways. And let's talk about what those ways are. There are simple ways they use the information. There's complex ways they use the information. Simple, they profile deals. You have a mortgage-backed security you want to look at, you pull up a report. It might include aggregated information about the loans. It might also include all that other aggregated information from all those alternative data sources. Pretty straightforward. You might have automated routines to develop strategies. You might have a flag that kicks off when 2005 all-day bonds, loans in California have an inflection up in default rate. And then it might trigger you to go look at your exposure to California in your portfolio. Then you get to really more sophisticated and complex activities. You're going to build models, and you're going to predict key fundamentals. You're going to build your own, and they source third-party models as input into their own models and also as a benchmark model to compare to their own internal models. And finally, they do what-if scenario and sensitivity analysis. This is ad hoc analysis on all those data sets joined together that I just mentioned. So what does that look like? That looks like a portfolio manager walking in the morning and saying, hey, I really think that unemployment rates are going to rise in these 10 to 15 metro areas. And based on what I'm reading, it looks like lending standards are going to tighten for people with a FICO score of 650 to 700. I want you to tell me what our exposure is in our portfolio to that segment of the market. And the analyst does that work, and 30 minutes later, he has it in front of him. And the PM says, well, I want you to run 4 scenarios of different unemployment rates in these 10 cities and then in these 15 cities, and bring it back again. And an hour later, he comes back with that analysis. And by midday, the portfolio manager is liquidating part of his portfolio. That's real dynamic, real ad hoc analysis, and that is what the most sophisticated players are doing in this market. Why is that hard? It's hard because this is complex data to use. You've had a lot of talk today about how good technology is today. Technology is fantastic today. It is light years ahead of where it was 10 years ago when I was at Equifax and even when I was at MasterCard. But it's still hard to work with data like this. The data is really big. It's updated at varied frequencies. It has different levels of granularity, so linking together isn't always that simple. And it's on different lag time. That makes it hard to do ad hoc analysis. And it usually makes it time-consuming. And I think the way firms do this, but I think the way this market's going to evolve with these new sets of alternative data is going to be very similar. The market's going to move from very simple reports on how sales are trending from a panel of consumers to more complex ad hoc analysis that are going to, and models built on that, on those granular data sets that are going to give you much more confidence in your decisions. So if I walk through the key things that the winners in that market are doing that I think will apply to this new alternative data market, the first is winners are going to build proprietary models, and they're going to conduct their own ad hoc analysis on multiple data sets. Second, they're going to reduce their error, or they're going to increase their confidence by using multiple data sources to test their ideas. And some of them are going to be kind of redundant data sources. And the reason for that is they're going to realize there's a lot of value in how the data is processed. Just because you have 2 sources of similar data doesn't mean the output is going to be exactly the same result. There are 3 credit bureaus, but your FICO score at each of those 3 credit bureaus can be pretty different. It's the same data. It's because of the way they handle it and the way they process it is different. Some data sets are going to be much more important than others. But the winners get a lot of value out of taking those less important data sets and using them as complements to that really important data set to get much, much more confidence in their decisions that they're making. Speed. I'm going to talk a little bit about this on the next couple slides, but that example I gave, the winners are going to focus on reducing the amount of time it takes from when a PM has a hypothesis to when he can test that hypothesis with data. And what that means is, for things, analyses you know you're going to want to run, you're going to want to automate them. For ones you can't predict, you're going to need tools and people that can do them on the fly really quickly. Skills. We talked about this a lot. Well, they talked about this on the panel earlier. That line between the fundamental analyst and a quant is going to blur. I don't want to overstate it, but people talk about the quantamental approach to investing, and I think that's a real trend. What I mean by that is, fundamental analysts need to be able to think about the business idea and the data in an integrated way so that they can be effective. They're probably going to learn, some of them are going to write some code. Some of them are going to write Python. Talk to young people coming out of school today. That's not a crazy idea to them. They're already familiar with it in most cases. Finally, regards to the ecosystem, there's going to be a lot of providers. Clients are not going to do everything themselves. They're still going to use value-added service providers because they're going to understand that the way you process the data and your expertise in the data and how it's used and how to think about it is going to be valuable for their team. So I want to talk a little bit more about 3 and 4, especially 4. So this line between fundamental analysts and quants blurring, this is not a thing just on Wall Street. This is a broad trend that's happening. McKinsey talks about it all the time. They have this concept of a translator, and just to read this, a translator are people who know the business problems deeply, but also understand the data science and computer science aspects of it. So let's dig into this. What does this really mean? What this really means is, something happens in the real world. Like company A announces they're changing something. They have a new strategy. And you have to come up with a hypothesis saying, well, what implications is that going to have? How do I trade on that? And you say, well, you have to know what data sets you have available to answer those questions. And then you say, well, which data set should I actually use to answer what questions? And that requires you knowing a lot of detail about these data sets. What's the content? What's the coverage? What's the bias? What's the time lag? And then you say, what is the exact output I want? What is the exact analysis I need? OK, then you got to do it. And then you got to review it. And you have to apply judgment. You have to say, did I learn something? Is there something here? Do I have more questions that are worth pursuing? And if so, you kind of complete the process. Now, to us, this is just a traditional analytic life cycle. But shortening this time with data this big and this complex, even with the technology today, it's very hard. And not many people are doing it, but some are doing it. This is what we believe is going to be the next trend, and our solutions going forward are really focused on helping clients do more of that ad hoc dynamic analysis. So I'm going to walk through a couple examples of this to try to make this real for you. Wayfair. Everyone knows Wayfair? Fantastic company, very high growth company, online, home goods. This is their revenue growth. This is their reported information, just a great success story. People on Wall Street are very interested in this stock, obviously, because when something's growing that fast, you want to know, can they keep it going? And the reason that it's a hard market is because home goods, they're not grocery. They're infrequent purchases usually. Wayfair has very high customer acquisition costs. They had to build a brand. They had to bring the traffic, and they've done that really successfully. But some of the questions that you're asking is, every next incremental customer after the early adopters is hard. So can they keep it going? And are those new customers they get, are they going to spend the same amount? Are they going to be as profitable? Are they going to return at the same rate? And Wayfair reports a tremendous amount of detail around this. It's some of the most detailed reporting I've ever seen at a company. They report cohort performance. So they group everyone who first purchased at Wayfair in 2015. And they say, how many of those people returned and what was their spend over time? And then they do the same thing for 2016 and back for many years. And they report on orders from new customers versus repeat customers. This is great information. So the question someone like me, who has my background, asks, who uses data, I say, well, could I do better? Right? Could I get an information edge that is not provided through these results? And of course, if I have some of the data sets that now are available on Wall Street, I can certainly get it earlier, but is more granular information actually useful? What if I didn't have annual performance? What if I looked at it quarterly or monthly or weekly? This is all grouping their US and international business today. What if I could split out US and international? They're only reporting order counts down there. What if I could look at total spend? Because that's really the metric I care about. Let's take a look at that. So this is spend in our consumer panel at Wayfair. And you can see it's growing over time, just like theirs is. Not as rapid because it looks like there's a decline and there's a slowdown in Q4, which is in 2016, which is what they reported in the US. So let's look at it a little more granularly. We're going to look at a cohort. We're going to take people who first purchased at Wayfair in Q4 2016. And then we're going to compare it to people who first purchased at Wayfair in Q4 2015 and 14 and 13. So this is not annual. This is just Q4. In our data set, you could look at this right after the end of the quarter. You could look at this monthly, but let's just keep it simple and look at it quarterly. And what you see is the growth rates down at the bottom. 2016, there was an inflection down. It only grew by 12% in our data set. The number of first-time purchasers in Q4 at Wayfair. OK. What about average spend per first-time purchaser? This is people who have first spent at Q4 2016. So you see I have 3 lines here. One for 2014, one for 2015, one for 2016. The y-axis is amount spent per customer. The x-axis is quarters since their first purchase. So in 2014, people spent about $320 on their first purchase. 2015 went up to $350. That's a great increase. 2016 came back down. Came back down to about $335. OK. Why is that important? That's important because first-time purchasers are a huge part of their spend at Wayfair. You can see it's 57% of spend in our panel. Now, repeat purchasers, though, are becoming more important. Maybe they're going to be able to make up for it by increasing the amount at which people make repeat purchases. So let's look at that. Let's look at people who purchased for the first time in Q3 by year, and let's look at what proportion returned every quarter after that. So we have the bottom line is 2014. These colors are no good. The top line is 2015, and the purple dot is Q3 2016. And you can see here, in 2014, the quarter after someone made their first purchase, about 14% of people came back and made another purchase. It was a lot better in 2015. It was almost 18%. So they improved that repeat purchase rate. That is a great sign. Q3 2016, it went back down to 16%. OK, and so did average spend for the first-time purchasers in Q4 2016. Well, what if we go back a quarter just to see, is it the same kind of trend? So now Q2 is the same. People who first purchased in Q2 2016 also came back at a lower rate, just over 14% than they did in the prior year, which was 16%. Well, let's look at Q1. Well, Q1 is the same thing. Every quarter, the repeat purchase rate went down. Do you mind if I keep going? Went down in our consumer panel. OK, that gives me more confidence that this is really happening. This isn't a one-off blip. OK, but maybe it's still OK. Like, how do these companies compare to their competitors? Maybe looking at some benchmarks would be helpful, just to understand what really is good performance versus tougher performance. So we picked some other firms in the market, all home goods and furniture retailers. You could argue about which is most comparable and which isn't. But at least for some benchmarks, it's helpful to frame the idea. So in Q4, what proportion of spend is from first-time purchasers? Wayfair at 57%. West Elm's pretty close. It's 53%. The others are varied. And it makes sense. Home Shopping Network, different model, much more mature business, much less of their revenue. Their spend is from first-time purchasers. Well, let's look at retention rate, because we looked at what was happening with Wayfair on the past slide. This might provide some context. So you can see Home Shopping Network has Very strong retention rates. 35% of people are coming back to Home Shopping Network after they make their first purchase. So let's just remove Home Shopping Network, because that's distorting the graph. Wayfair is that purple line. So the y-axis is percent of first-time purchasers that come back. X-axis is number of quarters after the first purchase. That purple line looks pretty good. They're very good at driving repeat purchases compared to their competitors. So it's hard to believe, what do they have to do to drive that higher? I mentioned earlier, first-time purchaser spend in Q4 went down year over year, 2016. How does that compare to the competitors? All the other competitors went up. Maybe competitors are learning from all the good things that Wayfair is doing to drive traffic. Maybe they're changing their assortment. But it provides context around looking at Wayfair's performance. Alternative data like this can help you frame it. It can give you more confidence of whether a trend is real. I'm going to skip through this because we're running out of time. One more quick example. Retailers are closing stores, like Macy's. What are the implications? We have a new product. It connects consumer spending data to the stores it happens at, to the shopping centers those stores are in, to the REITs that own those stores. You can see which shopping centers are better performing than others. You can connect it to REITs. You can see that GGP, General Growth, and Simon have most of the shopping centers with Macy's in them. You can then start ranking. Some Macy's are doing positive year-over-year performance, some are doing negative. Some shopping centers are doing positive year-over-year performance, some are doing negative. 38% of Macy's stores are doing negative performance. 28% of them are negative in a shopping center where the shopping center is positive. GGP is over-indexed toward Macy's that are lower performing. You can rank GGP properties by General Growth properties by which are the worst performing Macy's to try to get a sense of which ones might have the most impact and what they might do with them. You can then look at what other stores are in those shopping centers with low performing Macy's. And that might give you an idea if you might want to go look deeper into those stores. Just to give you a sense of the kind of iterative thinking and hypothesis testing you can do when you connect these data sets and have tools available to use them. Our mission is to remove friction between users and their data so users can get the insights that they need. We do that through two sets of solutions at 1010 Data. On the left, we have our own insights platform. This is cloud-based software as a service, integrated high-performance platform. On the right, we have data insights products, many of which I've used today. A lot of them are consumer-oriented data, and we have one more corporate-oriented data set from a number of them, actually, from Dun & Bradstreet. And we turn this, the types of solutions we provide are a mix of turnkey insights, like a product like local market intelligence. This is go to a web browser. You can analyze consumer spending and store locations and demographic information shortly after the month end to see how firms are competing geographically and how they're doing. This is the one I just talked about, Shopping Center Insights. This is an Excel-based interface that a lot of folks on Wall Street would prefer to work in. And the final thing we do on the left side of that page, we have our Insights platform. This is think of it as an empty container of a high-performance database with lots of different interfaces that you can put any data in you want. And you can do ad hoc analysis like you're working in a spreadsheet on arbitrarily large size data sets and multiple joined together. So to conclude, hopefully I've given you a flavor of how we think the market for alternative data is going to evolve. People are going to be going from the simple to the more complex. The winners are going to be the ones who have the best ideas and ask the best questions and use data to answer them. And that's going to require changes to the skills and technology that people use today. Hopefully you guys found that helpful. I'll be around afterward if you have any questions. Thanks for the time.